A national champion gymnast brutally murdered just days before her senior year of college. Now we're learning new shocking details in the case that the accused killer was apparently her boyfriend, and he allegedly shot her 8 times. We're taking a closer look at the case of 21-year-old Kara Welsh and everything we know so far about her murder. Kara is from Plainfield, Illinois, about an hour outside of Chicago. Her Midwest roots went deep. She was also a champion gymnast at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. There, she was a standout athlete, specifically on vault, where just last year, she took home the individual title in the NCAA Division III championships. The fall semester started at Whitewater on September 3rd, and in the days before that, hundreds of students headed back to the college town to unpack and settle in. Kara was no different. She planned to begin her senior year of college last Tuesday, studying management in the College of Business and Economics. But before that could happen, tragedy struck, and 21-year-old Kara lost her life. It was just before midnight on Friday, August 30th, when Whitewater Dispatch got a 911 call for a girl who was, quote, dying. When first responders arrived on the scene, just a block from the university's campus, they found Kara, who'd been shot multiple times. She was pronounced dead on the scene. And for a while, that's really all we knew about the case. Investigators announced they'd arrested a 23-year-old male, but didn't say who or how he knew Kara. Her death led into the 3-day Labor Day weekend, so for days, we didn't even know the suspect's name and only heard about recommended charges. But the Tuesday after Labor Day, charges were finally brought against the suspect, 23-year-old Chad Richards. And since then, we've learned a lot more about Richards and his relationship with Kara. Richards had actually also been an athlete at UW-Whitewater. As recently as 2022, he was listed as part of the school's wrestling team. According to Richards, he and Kara had been dating, and they were at his apartment when they got into an argument. There's some evidence of this too. One of the doors inside the apartment has damage, almost like someone was kicking or punching it out of rage. Richards later admitted he was the one who made that damage. But as for the argument, Richards told investigators he doesn't remember what they were fighting about, but says Kara was the one who grabbed a handgun from a nearby table. According to a criminal complaint, Richards told authorities that he feared for his life and wrestled the gun away from Kara. After that, he shot her 8 times. When first responders arrived, they found Kara in a pool of blood with multiple gunshot wounds to her neck, shoulder, wrist, leg, abdomen, thighs, and lower back. Investigators later determined Richards fired shots at Kara even after she'd already fallen to the ground and was injured. She was pronounced dead on the scene after Richards himself called 911, a call he made after first calling his father. On the scene, investigators collected a black handgun and multiple shell casings that were near the door. They also arrested Richards, who was later booked into the Walworth County Jail. Days later, he was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, endangering safety by use of a dangerous weapon, and disorderly conduct while armed. His bond was later set at $1 million. He appeared in court just last Friday, the day the criminal complaint was filed.
This is the 115 criminal call for September 6, 2024. Could I have the continued appearance for the state? I'm assuming there's 2, right?
Yes, Zeke Wiedenfeld appears for the state on the first matter.
Have your appearance, please.
Attorney Gibson Hatch appears in person for Mr. Richards, who appears by video.
The hearing was short. Richards appeared virtually from the jail and never spoke. We only really heard briefly from the defense and prosecution.
The criminal complaint in this matter was just filed earlier, late morning today. How would you like to proceed given that?
Your Honor, I did get a copy of the complaint. I have read it. At this time, we would waive its formal reading, reserving all objections to form, content, and jurisdiction. And we can proceed from there.
Okay. Attorney Wiedenfeld, is the victim's family here and wanting to be heard?
We are in compliance with victims' rights. I don't know if anyone has anything to bring up with the court. No.
The hearing wrapped up after a preliminary hearing date was scheduled for next month.
So we'll proceed. Would you like to set this for a preliminary hearing?
Your Honor, at this time, I have spoken with Mr. Richards. We'd be waiving the time limits for the preliminary hearing.
This is then adjourned until October 28th at 2 o'clock for a preliminary hearing.
All this leaves many question marks in the case, and that's where we turn to former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Mike Korbanix.
Well, in this kind of case, there seems to be so much direct kind of evidence. I mean, someone called after a shooting occurred. I think one of the most important things in the defense of this case will have to be looking into his mental status at the time that this occurred.
With that in mind, we have to take a look at the specifics of the case. Apparently, the victim in this case was shot 8 times. And that kind of seems like a staggering number to me because even just one gunshot could kill someone, but 8 seems like quite a bit. What do you make of the number 8? Is that overkill?
That's going to be a difficult thing for the defense because, as you said, there was 8 shots. And I think also what was interesting too was they have early forensic um, showings and findings that there was a point in time where she really was not able to even move. She was laying on the ground in like a baby's sort of holding herself. And at that point, there were still shots being made. The other side of that, though, as well, is if someone has a mental breakdown and loses ability to comprehend what's happening, is it could go on for more than just a second and one shot.
So let's talk about 2 things that you brought up there. The first, that apparently there is news that the suspect in the case allegedly shot this victim after she had already fallen to the ground. She's already been shot and he continues to shoot her, at least according to the criminal complaint. I mean, that part is going to be kind of difficult because if he's claiming self-defense, obviously how would she be fighting back if she's already been injured?
Well, the self-defense is going to be a difficult defense, I believe, in this case, because of the fact that, as I understand the facts, is he had removed the gun from her. So she didn't have a gun to threaten him with, although he's claiming, we don't know for sure if that gun was there or he bought it there. But the facts, as they're showing, is that he removed the gun. So, self-defense is very much a step-by-step defense because you have to see when you didn't need that sort of excess force to defend yourself. So if you remove the gun, why would you need to shoot any further?
And that's my question as far as the defense goes, because let's say this is a legitimate self-defense situation and he shoots her one time to stop her from approaching him. He says he feared for his life. But what about those other 7 gunshots that he made toward her? I mean, is that really going to be tricky for the defense?
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's going to be so important to have someone who's a mental health expert to evaluate to see where it goes. Another thing as well that's going to be difficult for a defense in this type of case is the very fact that he, according to what I understand, had smashed the door with his hand, all these things of that nature. So it actually looks like the victim was the person who got the gun for self-defense. And that self-defense was reasonable, yet she never took a shot.
You talked about how the door had some damage to it. It looked like it had either been punched or kicked, and it sounds like that's what he said happened as well prior to this argument. He was kind of taking his anger out, at least so it seems, on the door. And then he also told investigators he doesn't even remember what the argument was about. At least according to the criminal complaint, we as the public right now don't know what they're fighting about because he says he doesn't remember. Are those kind of red flags too for his defense?
Yes and no. Those are kind of things that we don't know how they develop till there's some expert evaluation of what happened there. I mean, I would assume there'd be some mental health experts that could say, yeah, when you lose your ability to logically think, you may not any longer have the ability to recall what exactly happened. So you were living moment to moment. But I think many people go through emotionally stressing times where they realize they were hurt and they were upset, yet they really don't remember what it was about because their minds just went off the charts. Well, that may happen here, but it's going to be a thing that needs a lot of scientific insight. And also, it's still something a jury has to be convinced of. And I'm sure the state will have some other mental health experts to fight that sort of conclusion and see where it goes.
And it's the expert opinions from mental health professionals that will either help or hurt Richards' defense. Now, this takes place in Wisconsin, so the statute there I know is not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. And in order for his defense to come forward with a strong argument in that case, I know you've mentioned both sides will probably want to talk to some sort of mental health expert. What would all of that look like if you can hypothesize what either side would kind of bring to the table?
Well, I think the defense would be that he had lost his ability to think logically and he had a mental health breakdown. The state would look to have a mental health expert to say that didn't occur. And we have all these other factors that show that this was maybe something that was intentional and preconceived, especially with the showing of the doors, the injuries he had on his hand and knuckle that shows that he punched the door, the fact he admitted that he was punching the door and things of that nature. So it's not going to be an easy case.
We've kind of talked about two routes here where we could do the not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, or potentially self-defense, maybe a combo of both. I always wonder if this is down the line, obviously, but let's say this case is going to trial. I always wonder whether the defendant is going to take the stand and testify. And I know oftentimes that's the case when they mention self-defense.
That's always a difficult thing to predict because, a lot of times trials, as much as people try to figure out what's going to happen, you really have to be, once you're in a trial and prepare, it's step by step as to how witnesses answer questions. A lot of unexpected things could happen there. So it's going to be difficult, but it's always difficult to have a defendant on the stand in these kind of matters, because in any kind of matter, because it sort of then is shifting the burden of proof. And now people are hearing and evaluating both sides to see where it goes. And that's going to be difficult in this case. One of the things, though, I think is going to be an interesting factor is the fact that after this occurred, he called the police. He didn't try to escape from there. He didn't do anything. And that may help his credibility. I mean, I'm not saying this is horrible. This is one of the worst crimes you can have, when someone kills somebody. But it still may be a part of the defense that can work strongly by the fact that he didn't deny this happened. He tried to help it by calling the police and trying to get some health people to help her. So it's not like he just shot her and ran. So I think that's going to be an interesting factor, because he did call the police on himself.
The fact that Richards called 911 after the shooting should be a major talking point for the defense. But there's more to it than just the emergency call. You did bring up a good point that he called 911 not long after the shooting occurred, but according to the criminal complaint, he called his dad first and then 911. I don't know, does that matter, the order of who he called after the shooting?
Well, it depends on how it's evaluated. It's an issue that needs to be addressed, absolutely. But then again, it could be that his instinct was to call my father or another family member, whatever, someone's instinct to call someone they know who they could rely upon. And that may also be further proof that he did lose his consciousness and ability to think clearly, because maybe his father told him, call the police and get some help. Obviously, if he called his father, he was looking for help.
So we know that he called his father for help, let's just say, and then also for sure he called 911. So when first responders got there, according to court documents, he was there in the hallway bawling, crying, had kind of lost it. Does that reaction matter? Could that reaction of when first responders get there to the scene, they find Kara Welsh, unfortunately, has passed away already once they're there, but his reaction, the defendant's, does that matter at all?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But every reaction can be interpreted in many different ways. That's always the interesting thing about a trial. And the thing is, though, is that he wasn't there looking like he was in control of the situation or trying to manipulate the situation. He was maybe at the realization, which could further strengthen his insanity defense or lack of mental health at that point in time, is that he then realized what occurred. He didn't realize what occurred as it was occurring, but afterward he did. If he was sitting there with his arms folded, angry and yelling at the police as they came in, that would be a different interpretation for the jury. They could look at it and say, he did it, he knew he did it, and he was satisfied with what he did. But here it looks like he realized what occurred, didn't realize when it was happening, and that he just lost it.
So we know investigators will take a look at the facts of the murder and, of course, what happened after. But then there's Richards' relationship with Kara leading up to her death. This is actually a story we covered last week on Law and Crime when we learned the original details, and at the time we weren't even sure what their relationship was. But since more recent court appearances and the criminal complaint had been filed, we learned that they were in a relationship. At least according to Richards, the defendant here, he had been dating the victim, Kara Welsh. Does that matter, the relationship between them? I mean, this wasn't obviously a random shooting a person down the street or a robbery gone wrong. These two had a history together.
Absolutely. It's sort of a much different way of looking at it, because it wasn't something that happened by chance. They were obviously people who had a relationship, and that may also play into the fact that emotion was involved here, and emotion affected his mental health. And there's just a lot of facts we don't know that are needed to prepare these kind of defenses, because they're very complicated.
Because they did have a past relationship, I'm wondering if prosecutors, investigators are going to go to Kara's family, her friends, those who were closest to her, and say, did Kara ever come to you with any red flags? Was she ever nervous when she was around him? Were there any signs of battery or anger in the past? Do you think that's a route they would potentially take?
Absolutely, but I also think a route they're going to take more is, and this is with the whole new technology, is they're going to look into his phone and see if there were text messages, emails, phone calls, phone messages, length of phone calls. It's going to be interesting to see how they go step by step to see how this progressed.
Do you think that they're going to go through the text messages, the whatever it may be, social media exchanges, and see what their relationship was like, or whether they were even talking to other people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see, as well as because something like that they will also need a search warrant for and have to show some probable cause as to a connection of why they have to go into a phone. The searching a phone is a very new legal issue because of the fact it's just becoming more and more like the phone is now, and I don't mean to sound like that old guy, but the phone now is like why people are comfortable with it. People who haven't used it all the way through their careers are seeing that it's really like another person standing there who's a direct witness, and that's why the government always wants to have access to people's phones.
Kara's death is still under investigation, and Korbanek says it's still very early to predict exactly where her case will lead.
It comes across with not many factors. It's just happened in such a quick way, and the very fact it's so unusual to have someone who allegedly committed this kind of incident to then call the police to come there. And I think that's going to be a very interesting issue that's going to be addressed by both sides and will really show us where it's going, but it's just too early to predict with the facts we have in front of us.
Richards is due back in court on October 28th for a preliminary hearing, and it's then that we can expect to learn even more details about the case. As for Kara, a GoFundMe page benefiting her family has already raised $50,000 since her death. If you want to donate, you can find the link to that page in this video's description. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Gillespie.